For as the light of the morning cometh out of the east, and shineth even unto the west, and covereth the whole earth, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. Therefore sanctify yourselves, that your minds become single to God, and the days will come that you shall see him. For he will unveil his face unto you, and it shall be in his own time, and in his own way, and according to his own will. This is Unveiling Jesus Christ.
Hello and welcome to Unveiling Jesus Christ. I'm John Cassanet. In my last podcast, I addressed the fire, jacinth, or smoke, and brimstone of Armageddon, the three godly tools of God's destruction during the second woe. John refers to these three godly tools again, for the third time, in Revelation 9:18, where he adds that by these weapons of war, the third part of men will be slain. This is a symbolic number that we've talked about before, but let's discover together a few new insights about Armageddon from John's third mention of these trilogy of destructive weapons. For the nutshell version of this podcast, you can check out section 124 in my book. So let's begin with the language in Revelation 9:18, which states, quote, "By these three was the third part of men killed, by the fire and by the smoke and by the brimstone which issued out of their mouths." Close quote. I already talked about how in Revelation 9:15 the third part of men will die during the second woe, or Armageddon. You can go back and check out my podcast from February 4th of 2025. In that verse, we were told about four angels from the Euphrates River, or the bottomless pit. These are the bad guy spirits that will slay the third part of men using the three godly tools of fire, smoke, and brimstone. Here, we're told that by these, meaning the three godly tools, the third part of men will be killed. So we have the bad guy spirit sons of perdition, who are the horsemen, with power and influence over the mortal armies of 200 million men represented by the horses, using three godly tools whereby the wicked will slaughter the wicked. So we've heard all that before, and now John repeats the image a second time. I know I keep telling you that John doesn't repeat himself, or does he? Have I been wrong this whole time? Of course I haven't been wrong. So let me explain. On the one hand, this is like Revelation 8:13, where John hears an angel in heaven, quote, saying with a loud voice, "Woe, woe, woe to the inhabitants of the earth by reason of the other voices of the trumpet of the three angels which are yet to sound." Close quote. Obviously, one woe is not enough to express the horrors that await the wicked, which I talk about in my podcast from December 24th of 24. So maybe John is simply emphasizing for the second time in two verses that death during Armageddon will occur by these three plagues of fire, smoke, and brimstone. Actually, John is expressing two types of death, so he's not repeating himself, true to what I have been telling you all along. He's describing one, physical death by these weapons of war, and also spiritual death that occurs by these weapons of war. He repeats himself to describe two types of death. In Revelation 9:17, we find that the horsemen have breastplates of fire, jacinth, and brimstone, saying, quote, "And thus I saw the horses in the vision, and them that sat on them, having breastplates of fire and of jacinth and brimstone, and the heads of the horses were as the heads of lions, and out of their mouths issued fire and smoke and brimstone." Close quote. Now, if you notice in this verse, we're told that out of the mouths issued fire, smoke, and brimstone. But we have to ask ourselves the question, is this from the mouth of the horsemen or the mouths of the horses? Because both are referred to in the same verse. And the answer is we're now talking about fire, smoke, and brimstone that comes from the mouths of the horsemen. Why? because it's part of a chiastic form of poetry in this verse that we talked about in my last podcast. You'll recall that in the first and last parts of the verse, we have these parallel and paired statements. So in the first part of the verse, it talks about them that sat on horses had breastplates of fire, jacinth, and brimstone. And then in the last part of the verse, we had out of their mouths issued fire, smoke, and brimstone. But in between them, we have the heads of horses were as the heads of lions. That's obviously referring to the horses. So at the focal point of this verse in our hourglass poem, the focal point is the horse and the head of lions that are the same thing to describe each other. But on the outside of the hourglass, we have the horsemen with their breastplates of fire, jacinth, and brimstone, and fire, smoke, and brimstone, which issued out of their mouths, meaning the mouths of the horsemen. So now let's go to Revelation 9:18, where John again talks about fire, smoke, and brimstone issuing out of their mouths. Now, this is not part of the chiastic poem. The chiasmus was in Revelation 9:17, but in Revelation 9:18, John has gone rogue, and he's adding a new thought that does not fit the chiastic pattern. This refers to the mouths of the horses. It's entirely and separate and has a distinct meaning. So, to summarize, because this is a little confusing, it's hard to kind of imagine when we're just talking about it and we don't have it up on the screen to see what I'm talking about. But in Revelation 9:17, we have the three tools of the horsemen, who are, of course, evil spirits that bring spiritual death. Spiritual death, as in sons of perdition who suffer a second death. So the difference between a spiritual death and the second death is that spiritual death is banishment from the presence of God, and second death is a total banishment that lasts forever. And by these tools, this third part of men, these mortal sons of perdition, will die this form of death during the second woe. That's Revelation 9:17, focused on the horsemen. Then we come to Revelation 9:18, where we have the three tools again in the mouths of the horses. That is, with the mortal armies represented by this 200 million number that symbolically depicts them. Now we're talking about physical death that comes to this same class. Now listen to the language again with this explanation in mind from Revelation 9:18, saying, quote, "By these three was the third part of men killed, by the fire and by the smoke and by the brimstone which issued out of their mouths." Close quote. Notice how it uses the word killed in this verse. A spirit body cannot die and cannot be killed. So here we're obviously talking about the mortal armies and mortal death and killings that will occur during the second woe we call Armageddon, pertaining specifically to mortal sons of perdition. But all of this physical killing and death come from the three tools in the mouths of the horsemen. It is done at their direction, their influence, control, and their power, those who are these unembodied and disembodied spirit sons of perdition, the same guys that get loose to torment men and bring spiritual darkness on the earth during the first woe in Revelation 9, 1 through 12. We then have them and see them again in Revelation 9, 13 through 15, which are these evil spirits loosed from the Euphrates River, that is the bottomless pit, with power of fire, smoke, and brimstone, used against the third part of men to kill the body and to bring about spiritual death. The wicked spirits thus bring death both physically and spiritually to wicked men upon the earth when the wicked slay the wicked during the Battle of Armageddon. And that's why John is repeating himself. He's not doing it just because he's emphasizing a point. He's talking about two different things. Now, a quick reminder and to highlight some scenes to coming attractions during the third woe, where we will talk about spiritual Armageddon. It is at that time that Christ will take back the power of fire, smoke, and brimstone, these tools that the evil spirits are allowed to use for a season will be taken back from them when the dragon, the beast, and the false prophet in Revelation 16:13 occurs, saying, quote, I saw three unclean spirits like frogs come out of the mouth of the dragon, and out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet, close quote. It's kind of interesting that we have these three tools that bring about God's purposes, that is the fire, smoke, and brimstone. And now we see that when we get to the third woe and we're talking about spiritual Armageddon, guess what? We have three classes of evil spirits whose heads are the dragon or Satan, the beast or Cain, and the false prophet Judas Iscariot. Now, if you go back to my podcast on December 31st of 2024, I introduced these three players, but we have much more to come about them when we get to Revelation 16:13. The point is, all of these things are interconnected, and the symbols fit perfectly with three tools, three different types of spirits. And we then see that in Revelation 16:13, during the third woe, we're going to take care of all three of them and get rid of them off the earth. The bottom line is that fire, smoke, and brimstone represents the powers of evil spirits to influence mortal armies to fight and kill each other. Richard Draper describes the symbolism, saying, the fire-breathing monsters succeed in their mission of destruction, killing a staggering number of people. Fire, smoke, and brimstone execute the judgment. Close quote. The power of evil spirits in the form of fire, smoke, and brimstone are the tools that they use to influence the mortal armies of Armageddon, such that from the mouths of the horses or from the mouths of the mortal armies come destruction. So we have to ask ourselves, why do we have these references to the fire, smoke, and brimstone coming from the mouths of horses and from the mouths of horsemen? Why the mouth? Why not their 4 feet of the horses? 4 feet would represent the universal geographical scope of what they're involved in. And I know you're kind of all saying, well, that would be a little weird. Well, I have precedents for this in the Disney animation of Beauty and the Beast. Never thought you'd hear that talking about Armageddon, right? Well, remember at the end of Beauty and the Beast, we all think that the beast is dead, that the curse has not been broken before the last rose petal falls and true love has been proven. But the beast comes to life. All is not for naught. Belle loves the beast loves Belle. We are going to get our happy ending after all. But here, when we see the beast coming to life, he transforms from his beastly form into the form of a handsome prince. And what is it that we see at that moment but rays of light shooting from his fingers and toes? So why can't we have fire, smoke, and brimstone shooting forth from the hooves of horses, or fire, smoke, and brimstone from the toes of the horsemen? There's always a reason for the imagery. The mouth has meaning, and that's why we can't rely on the hooves or feet of the horses and horsemen, respectively, to get the imagery. So what are we supposed to understand from the mouth? Well, let's go back to Revelation 1:16, where John describes the Savior in these words, and he had in his right hand 7 stars, and out of his mouth went a sharp 2-edged sword, and his countenance was as the sun shineth in his strength. Close quote. I talk about this imagery in my podcast from a year ago on January 21st of 2024. where we talk about this two-edged sword that essentially cuts both ways, but it comes from the mouth, even though the most natural place for us to see this sword would be held in his right hand of power. So why is the sword coming from his mouth? Now, if you don't know the answer to that, I'm going to have to just send you right back to my podcast. No. I'll tell you, so you don't have to listen to it again. The mouth represents the power to communicate. The sword in the mouth of Christ decrees his judgment. From thence are his judgments, both good and bad, two-edged that is, brought to pass. The mouth can represent what is spoken, decreed, as well as the speaker himself. From a paper in the 25th Annual Sidney Sperry Symposium, we learn the mouth is the instrument or agent of communication. By the mouth of all the holy prophets, by the mouth of my servants, and in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses. The mouth is also the source of God's pronouncements. Lest I smite you by the rod of my mouth, every word that proceedeth forth from the mouth of God, until the mouth of the Lord shall name. Close quote. Consider the metaphorical mouth of Moses in Exodus 4, verses 10 through 12, which states, quote, And Moses said unto the Lord, O my Lord, I am not eloquent, neither heretofore, nor since thou hast spoken unto thy servant, but I am slow of speech, and of a slow tongue. And the Lord said unto him, Who hath made man's mouth? Or who maketh the dumb, or the deaf, or the seeing, or the blind? Have not I the Lord? Now therefore go, and I will be with thy mouth, and teach thee what thou shalt say. Close quote. Now, when I think of a slow tongue that is mentioned in this verse, I'm kind of reminded of, no, not the prophet Enoch, although I probably should be reminded about that, but I think of True Grit, the recent version of that movie with Jeff Bridges as Rooster Cogburn and Matt Damon as a Texas Ranger, both looking for the same bad guy. Jeff Bridges accidentally shoots Matt Damon, who then almost bites off his tongue when he gets shot. When Bridges goes down to see the scene of carnage, it's clear that Damon has almost severed his tongue, and Bridges offers to simply pull out the nearly severed tongue. He's got his fingers in his mouth, you'll recall. It's a very funny scene. That's what I think of when I hear of a slow tongue, but that's just me. Getting back to Moses and his feelings of inadequacy in representing the Lord tells him, I will be with thy mouth. The mouth represents the power of the Lord to communicate through his earthly instruments, both good and bad. Let's put that symbol in the current context of Armageddon, including the horses that breathe fire, smoke, and brimstone from their mouth. Remember, these are killing machines, and death from their mouth occurs because of their power to communicate. When you think back on the power of communication that existed in World War II as a worldwide calamity and a worldwide war, I would have to say that we see nothing like the communication systems today that existed back then. Joseph Fielding McConkie describes the unique power to communicate in a modern world, saying, quote, the influence of the church of the devil is to be extensive, her satellites ubiquitous. She and all she stands for will be in all lands and among all people. Satan is no respecter of persons or nations. This will be a great day of his power, close quote. On a very small scale, consider a modern example or two of battlefield communications that we see currently. For example, in Russia's war against Ukraine, Putin enlisted the aid of thousands of North Korean soldiers. Well, they don't speak Russian. And so as you read certain different accounts on the internet, you hear about how disruptive and difficult it is for the Koreans and the death that occurs among them because they can't communicate. Looking at another illustration much further back in time, we recognize the power to communicate, especially evil communications, at the time the Lord confounded the language of people at the Tower of Babel, so they could not carry out their wicked designs. The Lord recognizes the power of communications. It is by the power of global communications, that which comes from the mouth, that masses are persuaded to carry out the evil designs of the dragon, beast, and false prophet, the horsemen on the horses of Armageddon. Donald W. Perry explains their connection to the symbol of the mouth of Armageddon, saying, "The symbolic satanic trinity of the dragon, the beast, and the false prophet send forth evil spirits or devils to do their work. Their emergence from the mouths of the devil and his helpers suggests that these evil spirits are symbolic of false communications, lies, and propaganda designed to deceive the people of the world." Similarly, in Revelation 12:15, a river that may represent lies comes from the mouth of the dragon. In Revelation 13:5, blasphemies come from the mouth of the beast. And in Revelation 13:14, the false prophet or second beast seems to speak threats and ungodly commands. Close quote. The mouth, as we see in these illustrations, is generally a symbol of power to spread lies and deceit. Today, this power is self-evident from the evils found on the internet and social media. Gordon B. Hinckley made this observation in 2004, saying, "I recently read that pornography has become a $57 billion industry worldwide. 12 billion of this is derived in the United States by evil and conspiring men who seek riches at the expense of the gullible. It is reported that it produces more revenue in the United States than the combined revenues of all the professional football, baseball, and basketball franchises, or the combined revenues of ABC, CBS, and NBC." Close quote. Now that was 20 years ago, and consider how much more the problem exists and has grown today. Consider also this prophecy found in Daniel chapter 7, verses 20 and 25 that speak of our time, saying, quote, "And of the 10 horns that were in his head, and of the other which came up, and before whom 3 fell, even of that horn that had eyes and a mouth that spake very great things, whose look was more stout than his fellows. And he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws, and they shall be given into his hand until a time and times and the dividing of time." Close quote. Just to put some context into this verse, the times, and dividing of time refers to 3.5 years before the second coming. He's talking about Satan's power until the time of the gathering of saints at Adamondi Ammon, that I'll talk more about when we get to chapter 10, and we're getting there pretty quickly. Until then, that is this times, and dividing of time, Satan is depicted as this horn, which symbolically represents power, and with a mouth that speaks great things, to the point that he wears out the saints of the Most High. So if you're feeling a little worn out by everything you hear and see in modern media, congratulations, Daniel saw you. And a whole lot of other people in our day being worn out by what we see and hear in the communications of Satan through modern communication satellites and modern media. Let's go back now to the mouths of Armageddon that spew forth fire, smoke, and brimstone, this trilogy of evil weaponry used to carry out the purposes of God during Armageddon. By their power to communicate, the spirit sons of perdition influence the heads of state and nations to command the armies of Armageddon. What does all this take us to, and where does it lead us? Armageddon will become the war of wars. Bruce McConkie used this phrase in the following quote, saying, "Surely, if the God of battles is destined to return, destroy the wicked, and bring peace on earth, all at the very moment when the greatest war of the ages is in progress, surely he will tell his prophets about that coming war. If he has been at pains to speak of wars and rumors of wars in the last days, surely he will not overlook revealing all we are able to bear about the great final war that will usher in the millennium. If prophetic voices have told us about lesser wars and smaller plagues, surely they will cry out in advance about the plague of plagues and the war of wars." Close quote. Now, that's a pretty meaningful statement by Elder McConkie as it relates to me personally, because I've been sitting here in the last several podcasts and will continue to talk about this war of wars. And Bruce R. McConkie talks about these prophetic voices that will cry out in advance about the plague of plagues and the war of wars. Well, I'm one of those voices. Now, I don't claim to be a prophet. I don't have any keys. No one's laid their hands upon my head and set me apart to say any of these things. But at the same time, the Spirit tells me the truths of the things whereof I speak and what's going on in the symbolism that John is talking about. Essentially, it is John who is talking about us, which is exactly what we're told in Revelation chapter 10 about his little book mission and his ministry, that his voice would be heard again in the last days. And I'm simply speaking the words of John and putting them in this podcast and on social media so that people truly can understand the truth of what Elder McConkie said, when there would be prophetic voices who will talk about this war of wars. Well, it is the voice of John. I just happen to be the one who's reading it from the book of Revelation. And there are others, of course, that are talking about it too. And in fact, those of you who are listening to the podcast probably are listening because you have a sense that we are galloping, pardon the pun, into the throes of Armageddon. And so these are the things that we're talking about. Armageddon will be this culmination of a long series of modern wars. World War I, World War II, Korea, the Middle Eastern wars, the Western and Eastern European wars. Gerald Lund provides an overview of the forms of modern warfare, saying, when the Savior was outlining the events that would transpire before his return, he intimated that war would become a natural phenomenon of the last days. And they shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. Behold, I speak for mine elect's sake, for nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. And there shall be famines and pestilences and earthquakes in diverse places. War is one of the signs of the times. It has become so much a part of modern day life that it is almost taken for granted. This century has seen cold and hot wars, civil, religious, racial, and revolutionary wars, aerial, naval, trench, and guerrilla warfare, chemical, biological, and atomic warfare. Close quote. These modern wars and rumors of war began with the United States Civil War, as we were told in Doctrine and Covenants, section 87, verses 1 and 2 and 6, which states, quote, "Verily, thus saith the Lord concerning the wars that will shortly come to pass, beginning at the rebellion of South Carolina, which will eventually terminate in the death and misery of many souls. And the time will come that war will be poured out upon all nations, beginning at this place. And thus, with the sword and by bloodshed, the inhabitants of the earth shall mourn, and with famine and plagues, and earthquake, and the thunder of heaven, and the fierce and vivid lightning also, shall the inhabitants of the earth be made to feel the wrath and indignation and chastening hand of an almighty God, until the consumption decreed hath made a full end of all nations." Close quote. The genocidal wars of the Jaredites and Nephites are types and foreshadows for this worst war of all modern wars that lies in our future. As weapons of fire, smoke, and brimstone kill the third part of men during the 7-year battle, there will be anarchy, famine, starvation, disease, pestilence. Conditions will worsen during the Great Tribulation in the second half of the 3.5 years of Armageddon. The horrible conditions of Armageddon will reach their zenith during the atrocities of the final abomination of desolation in Jerusalem during the last 3.5 days before the second coming. So I'm getting ahead of myself, and we have much more to come on this with many more details. Let me kind of conclude by saying the earth itself will be pained by the horrors of these final days, as stated in Moses chapter 7, verse 48, where Enoch looked upon the earth and heard a voice from the bowels thereof, saying, Woe, woe is me, the mother of men! I am pained, I am weary, because of the wickedness of my children. When shall I rest, and be cleansed from the filthiness which is gone forth out of me? When will my Creator sanctify me, that I may rest, and righteousness for a season abide upon my face? Close quote. It's important to note that the United States homeland will not escape the reach of this worldwide conflict. True, it will be centered in and will undoubtedly commence in the valley of Megiddo to the north and a little bit west of Jerusalem in the plain of Elon. But we learn in D&C 4563 that, quote, Ye hear of wars in foreign lands, but behold, I say unto you, they are nigh, even at your doors, and not many years hence ye shall hear of wars in your own lands. Close quote. That revelation, of course, was given on the United States soil. Doctrine and Covenants, section 3829, also states, quote, Ye hear of wars in far countries, and you say that there will soon be great wars in far countries, but ye know not the hearts of men in your own land. Close quote. Bruce R. McConkie adds some insights into the wars in our future, saying, quote, Be it remembered that tribulations lie ahead. There will be wars in one nation and kingdom after another until war is poured out upon all nations, and 200 million men of war mass their armaments at Armageddon. Bands of Gadianton robbers will infest every nation. Immorality and murder and crime will increase, and it will seem as though every man's hand is against his brother. Close quote. Donald W. Perry adds that all nations will come to battle at Armageddon. The great battle of Armageddon will not be a localized conflict, but the center of a worldwide war. Elder Bruce R. McConkie explained, the center of the battle will be on the mount and in the valley of Megiddo and on the plains of Elon, though, since all nations are involved, it cannot be other than a worldwide conflict. Close quote. If we stop for a moment and consider what is it that is driving the nations and peoples to come together to be engaged in this worldwide war, it is the prosperity and wealth of the world that cause people to forget about God as the source of their blessings. Great wealth has been a source of the moral bankruptcy in major segments of modern society, and the moral decay in the United States is worsening. I'm not telling you anything that you don't already know from your own observation, so here's the punchline. The Lord revealed a long time ago that when iniquity abounds on the American continent, the land will be cursed. We are first told this in 2 Nephi 1:7, which states, quote, Wherefore, this land is consecrated unto him whom he shall bring. And if it so be that they shall serve him according to the commandments which he hath given, it shall be a land of liberty unto them. Wherefore they shall never be brought down into captivity. If so, it shall be because of iniquity. For if iniquity shall abound, cursed shall be the land for their sakes, but unto the righteous it shall be blessed forever. Close quote. Note the word forever that is used in this verse. That brings it into a modern day application. Just as moral decay and wickedness led to the complete destruction of Jaredites and Nephites, the moral decline and wickedness will lead to warfare on the American continent today, and it will assure the destruction of wicked people in our nearby tomorrow. The Jaredite War and the war chapters in the Book of Mormon and the Nephite genocide, all preserved in the Book of Mormon, teach us about our tomorrow. That's why the Lord preserved these accounts. So that concludes my discussion of the horses of Armageddon who are currently still waiting in their stalls for the word of the Lord to come to them to loose them when the sixth trumpet angel of the second woe sounds. And when they are loosed, they will be armed to the teeth. Armed with the teeth of lions, in fact, armed both spiritually and physically with weapons of fire, smoke, and brimstone, the trilogy of instruments used by the evil sons of perdition, who are a trilogy themselves. This sounds kind of daunting, but this is a war where the wicked will slay the wicked. So my advice to you is really simple. Don't be wicked, and you have the promises of the Lord on your side. So that concludes my podcast for today. Next time, we'll get into some additional insights about Armageddon as we study Revelation 9:18 and talk about the tails of these horses with serpents' heads. Another heavy dose of symbolism coming your way. Until then, thanks for watching, listening, sharing, and subscribing. And to Jen and Kristen for all their technical support. I'll see you next time on Unveiling Jesus Christ.